members of the viewing and listening public, both at home and abroad, and on whatever platform you are. Very good afternoon to you. It was only on Thursday, I think it was Thursday, I was in Tobago, meaning to get back to Trinidad for the weekend press conference on Saturday. But being in continuous touch with the health department and analyzing and accepting and being educated by their analyses, we had cabinet last Thursday, but before cabinet we had a full assessment of the country's situation, and after the cabinet meeting I had to immediately address the country on the actions that we had to take in response to the numbers that were coming at us hard and fast. So last Thursday, you would have got your update, and we did take some actions in the form of rollback restrictions. Since then, we have been monitoring our situation on all fronts and anticipating that the actions that we are taking are to have certain kinds of effects, and we look to see what the response of the population is. From the very beginning, we've always maintained that success or failure in this approach to managing COVID lies very heavily on how our individual members of the population react to the things that we are doing. So today, that remains so, but this is a year and almost a year and a half we have been on this journey. And some people are very familiar with the route now to the extent where they can disregard the destination. Some people are still skeptical. Some people are still hopeful. And even some still think that God is a Trini and he won't let the virus get to us. So at this time, I would like to ask CMO to take over and give us the data of our situation and the analyses that flow from the data collected. And then I will come back and respond to what is being told to the population.
Hi, good afternoon, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. So we will begin firstly with myself. I'll give the clinical update as is usual. We'll be followed by Dr. Hines, who will give us the epidemiological update, and followed by Dr. Richards, who will give us a complete breakdown of what is happening in the parallel healthcare system to date. So beginning with the COVID-19 update for the 2nd of May, we have tested so far 132,776 persons. Over the last 24 hours, we have an additional 241 persons being reported, taking our total as of March 12th to 11,313, leaving our total recovered patients at 8,633, with an active caseload now at 2,506. Of those patients, 2,020 are in home isolation at this time, and 219 patients are in hospital in various facilities. The total step-down facilities right now 26, and total patients in state quarantine facilities 235. The vaccinated figures as of yesterday 4 p.m. 42,455. So just to break down a little bit of the capacity of the parallel healthcare system. So I'll go through a listing of what we have in different categories. At the Cora Hospital, we have, and this is total capacity, doesn't speak to the number of patients in there. We have a ward capacity of 98, ICU capacity of 2, giving us a total capacity at Cora of 100. Cuba Hospital and Multi-Training Facility, ward capacity 150, ICU 18, high dependency unit 38, giving us a total of 206. Augustus Long Hospital, 38, ward patients, 6 ICU, 4 HDU, giving us a total of 48. At the Arima General Hospital, which, as you know, we had to take back into the COVID system, parallel system, has 67 ward base sites, 2 ICU, 3 HDU, a total of 72. St. Anne's Hospital, we have 10 special spaces designated in a separate area of St. Anne's. At the Scarborough Regional Hospital, all combined, we have 106 spaces, 2 of which are ICU, 5 are HDU, and our grand total is 542, 462 of which are ward level ambulatory patients, 30 ICU, 50 HDU. And in terms of ventilator capacity, just to assure, we have a total ventilator capacity of 90 assigned to the parallel care system, which we have up and running about 30 right now in the system, which are not being fully occupied at this time. So I'll ask Dr. Hines to give us at this point the epidemiological breakdown, and followed by Dr. Richards.
Thank you, CMO. Good afternoon to the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. Continuing on from the CMO's presentation, we're going to look at where we are cumulatively, meaning up to this date, how many cases we have and what we are projecting going forward. What we see here is from that sort of start of July when things were quiet and then took off, left side of the curve, and we see that very steep upward trend in the August-September period, and then it starts to flatten, sort of slow down. So you get a flattish area that ran up until just about the end of March into April. And then you see a very steep upward climb again on that right-hand side of our graph. And the most important thing to note about this is the speed at which our cumulative cases have the potential to double. So this table that we see on the top left corner shows how that doubling behavior had behaved from that July time period to now, where it was at its fastest in the August-September period. Cases doubled every 8 days, 8 to 10 days over about a 3-week period or so. And then when we introduced the mandatory masking, we saw a drop to 19 days, so a drop in speed, and a subsequent drop. Next time it doubled, it took 192 days, that's over 6 months. But at the current rate of increase, what we are projecting is that we will double again from that last doubling landmark in 39 days. So we're clearly going a lot faster than we were going in that time period before. And that is a cause for concern. Let's amplify that concern a bit by looking at the next graph. Again, exactly the same cumulative graph that you're seeing, same blue bars. But now we've put some lines on it that show different projections. Let's focus on that middle line, that middle upward projection. I don't know if you can see that it's green, but if you can. The green line shows if we had continued at the pace we were going between the 14th and 28th of April, where we expected to get to. And what's most interesting and of most concern with this graph is that when you look at the last few blue bars, they are actually already above that green line. So we are already accelerating at a pace that exceeded the pace that we were seeing in that 2-week period between the 14th and the 28th. This is the trend that we need to curb. This is something that we need to try to slow down. Looking at the hospitalizations, and Dr. Richards will go into this in a little more detail, let's look at where we are right now. Between the 1st of March and now, the tall orange bars show how many new cases were reported each day. So you see those bars getting progressively taller, moving from left to right. And along with that, you see 2 lines. The one that's above is what we're calling the active cases, and you actually read that number off the axis on the right. So we know we had just a little over 2,500 active cases. And the one that's below, the line that's below, is the total hospitalized people, total number of people in hospital. You're actually reading the value for that off the axis on the left. And the important thing about this is that clearly, the more active cases you have, the more hospitalized people you have. Both of them trend upward in the same direction. Let's project that forward. At the current rate of speed, looking at the active cases, we are on track to have alarming numbers of active cases by May 22nd, looking at upwards of 10,000. And with that, if we actually project the number of hospitalized cases and look at what hospital capacity looks like in comparison to that, that dotted blue line that we see is the hospitalized people being projected going forward. The red horizontal line is where our maximum hospital capacity is at this moment. And you note that they will intersect. They actually cross each other. The dotted blue line goes past the red line. And that can happen within as few as 7 days and as many as maybe 10. So that is at the current rate of increasing number of active cases, we are heading towards the point in the very near future where we maximize our hospital capacity. Again, a trend that we would like to curb, halt, and reverse. Just expanding on that a little further, what we see is the green bars at the right now showing the sort of continuing upward trend in new cases. The orange bar is showing what already happened, and then that same purple, solid purple into dotted blue line showing where we are moving towards intersecting that maximum hospital capacity in short order. And therefore, there is concern with regard to the capacity of the parallel health system, which Dr. Richards will go into in more detail. The epidemiologic summary, I think we're familiar with this graph at this point. Left-hand side, gray bars, 2020. The tallest part of that gray bar period was in the August-September period, and this shows number of cases that were swabbed on a given day and turned up positive. If we go all the way to the right, we're now seeing that that purple end of this graph, the April figures actually surpass those that we were seeing in September. And we see that steady upward trend, taller and taller bars moving to the right. We look at that on a weekly basis and superimpose that on the proportion of people testing positive. We see again, week by week, those bars getting taller, the colorful bars being green January, blue February, orange March, and April so far having been concluded, the purple ones. And behind that, you're seeing that up to the completed week last week, there were about 35% positive COVID tests out of every 100 tests done. So 35% positivity. And that reflects growing numbers or growing proportions of people positive in the population, although that's not the proportion in the population. That's the proportion of those tested. But the upward trend is the concern. The demographics remain largely the same, where the 25 to 49 age group accounts for the majority of people, slightly more men than women, 52%. And among the deaths, we are seeing in this most recent time frame two interesting trends. One is that there's slightly more women now. So whereas it was about 25%, it's gone up to about 28. The other thing we're seeing is that we are having deaths in a slightly younger age group. We're having increasing numbers of deaths in the younger age groups. So as we were talking about above 60 before, we're having several that are under 60, between 50 and 60, some of them in their 40s. And the rate at which we're currently progressing, if that trend doesn't change, doesn't start to flatten, then we're going to reach the maximum for health or parallel health system capacity in a short space of time. I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Richards, who's going to go in more detail into that parallel health system.
Good afternoon, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, Trinidad and Tobago. I've been asked to provide an update and some information on the status of the parallel healthcare system, and today I will be providing some details on the hospital system, which really would be one of the components of the entire system. At present, the parallel healthcare system has a maximum capacity of 542 beds that can be used to manage ill COVID-19 patients. Of course, the system is built in to have, there are systems in place for the quarantine patients, persons who are in step down. But today we will be focusing on the care of the ill COVID positive patients. And we have 7 hospitals that have been designated and earmarked where persons are being treated with COVID. CMO would have gone through in detail a breakdown of those facilities and the number of beds. And I'd like to also identify that the system itself has 3 levels of care into each hospital, which would be ward level beds, which constitute the maximum number of beds, about 462 of the 542, ICU level beds, and HDU or high dependency unit level care. And this arrangement was meant to mirror the international evidence in terms of how and where the progression of care that a person with COVID-19 who was ill was required to receive. What we've noted is that within recent times, 14% of all new cases are being admitted to the hospital daily. We've looked at statistics from the beginning of the year to up until yesterday, and specifically between March 1st and May 2nd, and we are seeing a 14%, meaning 14 out of 100 persons who are COVID positive need to be admitted to the hospital because they are unwell. We are also looking at the number of persons who are being discharged from the hospital on a daily basis. And at present, we notice that only 6.6%, or 6 out of 100 persons in the hospital, are actually leaving. Now, an ill COVID-19 patient is quite unwell. They require oxygen, they may require ICU care, they may require care in terms of hemodialysis or for treatment for complications. And so the length of time that a person or COVID positive patient is in the hospital may vary anywhere between 3 to 5 days for a less ill patient to up to 10, 12, and in some cases 21 days. So I'm just trying to highlight how long a patient may be in a hospital bed. It's not a simple turnaround in terms of time. This graph shows the blue bars in number of cases and the increase in the 7-day rolling average for new cases, and we are somewhere in the vicinity of 233 as of today in terms of our 7-day rolling average. And I want the population to understand and to think, if we took 14% of that 233 and considered them going into the hospital and then commensurately less persons leaving the hospital, the sort of net impact on that in terms of the numbers that are increasing. This line graph demonstrates the trend in terms of admissions that have been ongoing between the period March 1st up until yesterday on the 2nd of May 2021. And you'll see that it's a general increasing trend. And over the last week or so, there has been a significantly greater increase from a day-to-day basis in terms of the number of persons that require hospital care. This is the graph that really was as a red flag and is a significant cause for concern in terms of how we proceed further with our pandemic response. And what it indicates is that the number of persons being admitted into the hospital far exceeds the number of persons that are being discharged. So let me give you an example. Yesterday we had a net increase of patients of approximately 45 patients in hospital. Today we had 31 patients, a net increase of 31 patients in hospital. As of this morning, the parallel healthcare system has 260 COVID positive patients in hospital, which puts it at a 48% capacity. The majority of these patients are in the wards, and we can just look at simple arithmetic and simple math in looking at the number of beds remaining and the number of persons that are staying in the hospital and increasing, and we can see that within 10 days the parallel healthcare system will become overwhelmed if we continue at this rate. So this is a very significant factor or cause for concern. We are looking at the hospitals being overwhelmed in under 2 weeks based on the current trends in terms of the number of cases that are being confirmed on a daily basis. I'd just like to remind members of the population that even though we speak of beds, a bed is not just a physical bed. A bed is a bed, yes, but it consists of the nursing personnel, the physicians, the personal protective equipment, the ventilator, the consumables, the ambulance system to support the care of that patient, the follow-up care of the patient at home. So even though we may think, yes, we have a 50% capacity remaining, we are looking at straining all other factors and systems within the healthcare system. The parallel healthcare system was developed as the Ministry of Health's response last year when the pandemic started in February and then activated in March as a means really of protecting the population's health by containing persons with COVID-19, and was also meant to not overwhelm the traditional healthcare system. The current situation that we are seeing as of today, where if we look at that graph and you see the red line and then the green line underneath, and you're starting to see a larger space between that red and green line as days progress, meaning that more persons are being admitted than discharged, meaning that the hospitals are filling at a faster rate that they can empty, is a cause for concern, because it means that resources that are limited are now going to be expended and may compromise the quality of care in other areas. The Honourable Minister spoke on Saturday about the impact of this on normal patients and other persons who may not be able to get a bed or receive care when they need care in the traditional system, and this is something that we need to pay attention to. This last graph demonstrates the number of patients and the trends in terms of the total hospital occupancy, ward occupancy, ICU and HDU occupancy. And you would note that the total hospital occupancy almost mirrors the ward occupancy, because the ward patients are the greatest number of persons that contribute towards the parallel healthcare system in terms of how it's arranged, about 85%. And you'll see that there's a general mirroring. The ICU and HDU has had some fluctuations, and that is by the mere nature of the disease in terms of the clinical progression and persons being unwell, recovering, and switching between ward, ICU, and HDU levels of care. But what is very worrisome about this trend, really at this point in time, would be the increasing upward trend, which demonstrates that these hospital beds are being filled and potentially can result in a collapse within, say, 7 to 10 days. Of note, the Ministry of Health did activate about 100 plus beds on the 30th of April into the 1st, and I would let the population know that within 24 hours, the Augustus Long facility accepted 28 COVID confirmed positive patients out of a full capacity of 48, and they are increasing in numbers. Arima had 10 in 24 hours of severe ill patients that were hemodialysis patients. So in closing, I would like to once again appeal to members of the population to please practice and adhere to all the COVID-19 prevention measures. We understand and we appreciate the sacrifices that you are making. We know that this has been a long war that we have been fighting since last February. We understand the situation, with respect to your families, friends, socializing, your workplace, but we are at a tipping point in terms of the hospital occupancy and the parallel system that was formulated and operationalized to protect you, your family, and the rest of the population. So please, let's continue to practice our 3 W's. Let's wash our hands, let's wear our mask properly, and let's watch our distance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richards. Before I go further, I would like to ask the Minister or maybe we should leave that for, no, since you're the Minister, I think you better come in now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Prime Minister, Minister Hines, Minister Stuart Young, Minister Dinobriga, Chief Medical Officer, colleagues, Dr. Hines, Dr. Richards, Dr. Trotman, ladies and gentlemen from the media, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, wherever you are. I just want to, for emphasis, recap a couple of things that Dr. Richards has stated. You would remember at the start of the pandemic last year, the global projection then was that for every 100 cases, 15% will need hospital care. You could see now we are mirroring that almost exactly. We are now seeing 14%. So the pandemic is sticking true to form. I just want to re-emphasize to the public that we only have about 10 days of hospital space left for you in the parallel healthcare system. It means if as a society we don't adjust to the measures that need to be done, when granny, uncle, daddy, mommy needs a bed, they may not get one. So all of us have to get the message. And we will not be housing anyone in the traditional hospital system. That is a no-no. So please, Trinidad and Tobago. I just want to reiterate that whilst we can add beds, there aren't hundreds of nurses and doctors out there to just bring on. Let me re-emphasize that. Our medical personnel are under tremendous pressure. And we can't run a hospital at 100% flat out for any length of period. We have to have a break. Additionally, it is the same staff that we are using now to vaccinate people. Okay? And we can't run a hospital at 100% flat out for any length of period. We have to have a break. Additionally, it is the same staff that we are using now to vaccinate people. Okay? properly, as Dr. Richards said, a bed is not just a physical bed. It is all the supporting actors that provide care for that person lying on that bed. So that is where we are. I have given you the vaccination numbers. Ventilators are serviced. We don't need the UNC to tell us that. We have drugs, we have PPE, syringes, swabs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Dayal Singh. Fellow citizens, this podium is very familiar to me, and it should be familiar to you, because we have been meeting here for almost a year and a half. In the early days, there was some fright, a large dose of ignorance, because the world didn't know what this virus could or would do, because it is a situation where this virus has, in our time, in the last year and a half, have come into the human population. That's a peculiarity about this virus. It hasn't been with us like other viruses in the common cold, but this particular one, COVID-19, came to us in 2019, and we were short of information, except the result of the virus infecting human beings were quite grave. Those of you who paid attention would have seen what happened in Bergamo in Italy. I think that was the poster for the world. And then, of course, you saw it spread across the world until it got to us. At that time, as it is today, there are a number of options available in trying to respond to this virus. Because, as I say over and over, decision-making is always about choosing an option. And usually there are many options available, one of which is do nothing. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we chose the option of building out, holding what we call a parallel health system. Because of the nature of this virus, if this virus is handled in the main hospital system, I need not explain to you the calamity that that will be, not just for COVID patients, but for other people who require hospital care. So we took a decision at tremendous cost to the state, you the taxpayer, that the way we will deal with this is not by a state of emergency, which in itself is just an inconvenience and a reduction of rights, without really addressing the problem of how do you treat with the virus after you've declared the state of emergency. We also decided that this virus is not going to just run away and leave us alone. And even as we were fighting it in the beginning to now, we have to accept that we are living with this virus, because we have to live before we die. And secondly, we said that we will have to maintain some support for some aspects of the economy if the virus is not to destroy us in the beginning. So now, a year and a half later, those principles are still in place. But we did say that we'll do everything possible to ensure that the people who get ill can have a reasonable chance of getting the healthcare response that is required under those circumstances. And we did say that we will take whatever action is necessary to ensure that we preserve the ability to generate healthcare. Because it is the inability to do that that will be the point at which the virus would have overcome us. And we don't want to be at that point to be able to say, well, we are there before the actions that are required to not get there are taken. So today you would have heard Dr. Hines, as you would have been hearing all week, and today more from Dr. Richards, that our healthcare system designed to protect the population is now in danger of being overrun because of the rate of infection that we are experiencing. I think Dr. Richards told us if we are not able to suppress the rate at which things are going now, we have healthcare dedicated to COVID to last us for 10 days insofar as hospital beds are concerned. Those of you who have been following the international news and the national condition would see how quickly you move from a situation of good to bad to woeful very, very quickly. Because that steep curve you're seeing there's almost a geometrical increase. It's not a 2 plus 2 plus 2. It's 2 times 2 times 2 times 4 times 8 times 16 times 32. That's how it goes. And now, nobody in this country, unless, of course, they are prepared to challenge the integrity of Dr. Richards, Dr. Parson and his team, nobody can say that we do not now know that if we don't take certain actions, that in a few days' time, we will be where others have been. We haven't been there yet. We've never been there. If we do not act now to do certain things, given what has been generated through the population, the level of infection and the requirement for healthcare that is demanding, that if we do not act in an attempt to stymie the growth rate, we know where that will lead us. As Prime Minister, I expect that those who will be affected by the action that is required are likely to take the position that they have been personally persecuted, that they have been deprived of opportunities to make money or to hold a job. All that is okay, because that is maybe reasonably so. But that does not in any way respond to the imperative where the options are very limited. We could do nothing and hope for the best. We could do a little more and not do enough. Or we could, by reasonable analysis, do what we think will give us the kinds of response that the circumstances require. And it's against that background that today, I was mentioning to you a while ago that when I met you on Thursday, I had intended to make the restrictions on Saturday, but I was convinced by presentations of the health department that taking the action we took last Thursday was required to be taken immediately and not postponed even for a day. Because what is it we're after? We are after, one, the movement of people within the national community. Two, the gathering of people as they move about in the community. Because those two actions are facilitators of the infection rate increase. So it matters not what you are engaged in. But if you are engaged in an activity that facilitates the movement of people or the gathering of people, the government has to see that as an area for restriction. Otherwise, the common sense thing will not be done. And it's against that background that we made the interventions last Thursday to reduce the number of people who are coming out there, all for good reasons at the personal level. Everybody could tell you what is the good reason why they are out and the absolute reason why they are out. But the requirement is that we want you not to come out if you don't have to. Get with the program that if it is not absolutely essential, then please don't come out, because then you become a part of the problem. And if you are engaged in a business that attracts people out, or attract them to congregate, then that is also a part of the problem. It is not that I love you any less. It is not that the doctors have become ogres. It is because being responsible for your well-being, this medicine is bitter, and if you don't take it, the wages of this is death for some people. And for all those who put the economy out front, there is nobody in this country who is more concerned about the economy than the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. But what kind of economy are we going to preserve if the outcome of not intervening now with economic disruption result in economic destruction in the face of a calamitous healthcare system and a large number of people sick and dead and dying? That is the option we face. So I, having sworn to do this job for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I have absolutely no qualms in doing what has to be done to protect the lives of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I'm doing that, as if that's not hard enough, I'm also required to protect some aspects of the livelihood of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And for those who spend time describing this as some arbitrariness and some opportunity to be disagreeable or uncooperative, what I will say to you, I hear you, because you are still alive. Ladies and gentlemen, last week, Thursday, based on the information provided to you today, we took a decision to take action for the next 21 days. Firm action. Just take action in some quarters. Next 21 days from last Thursday to try and push back the rate of infection in the country. I don't expect that to win me any popularity contest. I don't expect it to bring any happiness to you wherever you are. It will bring pain and suffering, but the outcome that we are after is an outcome that we must obtain, which is allowing each person a good chance of surviving the onslaught of the virus. So when we said that we will close all restaurants and bars, it is not because we have something against a particular restaurant here on Marva Road. It's not because we are against somebody selling chicken. It is against the fact that the business that you are engaged in is one that calls people out to you. And the government's exhortation to the country is go in the opposite direction and stay home. Only for a while. It is not for the rest of your life. It's not for the next 6 months, God willing. It is specifically that if we do it right in that way, then we will be able to go back to a situation of greater mixing and working and feeding outside and so on. If we don't do this now, there are lots of other things that we'll get busy doing, none of which you want for yourself, your family, or your community. When we close the bars, it's the same reason. I have no hatred for having a beer and talking to your friends by the rum shop. But I have a problem if in so doing it results in congregation in the neighborhood of the rum shop or in smartmanism in trying to beat the regulations behind closed doors and so on and so on and so on, because it reflects itself, whether you like it or not, After a good time has been had by all, it reflects itself on that graph, because after you've done what you've done, there's only one place you can go, and that is to the hospital, and hope that you make it there. So these restrictions are required to satisfy the need to respond to the virus, which is do not come out if you don't have to, and do not congregate if you do come out. If the people of Trinidad and Tobago observe those two things, alongside the washing of the hands, the sanitization, and the wearing of the mask, I have every confidence that we will not end up at the place where those graphs are pointing us. And we cannot now say we do not know what that location is if we don't turn those graphs down. Can't say that. And as a decision maker in this country, the ultimate decision maker, you might say, I can only ask you to take actions to turn away from that. So, I would like very much to give you notice that maybe on Wednesday or Thursday we will do X, Y, Z, and you know exactly what that will do. You know exactly what that will do. Because if I do that, every Tom, Dick, Harry, and his mangy dog will be in town tonight. And that's exactly what we don't want. So we're going to make some more changes. As of midnight tonight, all food service will be discontinued, and that includes itinerant, or what you call street food selling. All. I'm sure that there will be inconvenience here, but the corollary to that is I'm sure that most people, if not all, in this pandemic, in this crisis that is brewing, that you could feed yourself at home. You see, the idea behind closing the restaurants and the bars, as I just explained, I must admit, I did not anticipate the level of replacement for the convenience of those who have been affected by that restriction, resulting in the very thing that we're trying to discourage being encouraged by those actions. And I also refuse to believe that in a pandemic where death is our portion, to accept that we cannot do what has to be done to get by until the 23rd of May. And of course, all retail would be discontinued for a specific period of time, the details of which will come to you by morning. And that's non-essential retail. We will still keep the essentials going, the pharmacy, groceries, hardwares, and so on. You will get the list. It's the same list we use early on that we will bring back out. We used that list in April 20th. We will more or less bring back out that list now. And of course, given the burning desire to be there with everybody else, we are forced now to restrict the opening hours again from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. for food supply stores and pharmacies. And these are the essentials, and we are saying to the population again, for the days ahead as described, if you don't have to come out as an essential worker or don't have to come out for essential business, stay at home, stay away. away from people. If you do that, you will minimize the chances. I can't give you any guarantee, but it gives you the best chance of not being infected, giving us as a country the best chance of not increasing our infection rate, and more importantly, of turning around the direction of the infection rate. We will add those changes to the list that we've done, and we'll continue to enforce them vigorously. I just want to point out to the population, it's easy to pick on what we have restricted, but we have a lot going on still. The government, guaranteeing an income to its employees, have taken a significant block of employees out of circulation, and as such, we've left the private sector to also consider essentials there. But also, if you do, as we expect you would as responsible people, that you will carry the ones that you have taken off, if only for this short period of time. Make that sacrifice. Stop looking at the dollar. Because if you look at that $1, it may be $1,000 lost later on. Because I'm sure that the losses will be bigger if we get to the point of a collapse of the National Health Service and an overrun by the virus. So the essentials should stay in place. As you may recall, when we started out in January last year, we made it quite clear that because of the level of dependence on the energy sector, we will keep that sector open and do what has to be done. And thank God we did it. We had 1 or 2 instances of infections on platforms and so, but by and large, we kept that section wide open. Manufacturing is still open. If you are involved in those businesses, follow the protocols and continue. It is the elective behavior that we are after. And unfortunately, the interpretation that if you are not designated essential means that you are a useless non-essential worker is just unhelpful. It is that we are pulling back those persons who, if they are not out, we can continue for a while without them. But certainly there are some people who have to be out there. I mean, the tea and tech workers, they're out there all the time, keeping us with power. You know what happens the minute the power goes. So they're out there, keeping us with power. The water workers keeping us with water. The transportation workers taking those who have to travel. But you don't have to go out and meet your partner to have a beer. And you don't have to go to the cinema. I'm sure the vast majority of those who go into the cinema have Netflix in their house. So for the moment, use what you have close by and diminish your exposure. For heaven's sake, we are appealing to you. Of course, I have a lot of friends who like to portray me in a variety of ways, and of course to misrepresent what I say. A while ago, when I was cautioning about arriving at this station, I said if we do get to this point, we will not have the level of financial resources available to provide the level of support that we gave last year at this time. Because the funds just aren't there to be as supportive as that. Of course, the way that is put across is the Prime Minister say, all I have nothing to get. If all get in trouble. Not all you, we are all in this trouble. And of course, we have to be advised by our perpetual advisors that we have to provide support to people. Had they not told us that, we wouldn't have known that. So ladies and gentlemen, let me just give you an idea of the kind of support that this country provides to its population on an ongoing basis. And we, in a difficult situation, after what we have done for the last year, we are saying now, we are guaranteeing the effort to maintain the existing social support system. We're making cutbacks elsewhere. We're making rollbacks elsewhere in financing. We're taking pressure elsewhere. We're running up debt elsewhere. We are late paying elsewhere. But the one thing that we are undertaking to keep going is the social support system. And what is that social support system? It is the Senior Citizens Grant, where we support 107,000 people. And those of you who are following government's work will have seen how quickly that number has grown to 107,000. Not too long ago, it was 80,000. We are now supporting 107,000 people. And that is costing upwards of $4 billion. Social assistance, which is just people who look to the state for assistance. 19,000 people. That is $490 million. There are people with disabilities who are supported by the state. 25,500 of those people. That's $615 million. There are people who get their main meals supported by food cards in this country. 30,500 of them. That's $185 million. And during the COVID response, we supplied 25,000 food boxes to persons, and that absorbed the food that the farmers would have sold, some of it by contract, to the restaurants that were closed and so on. And of course, if I go to the list from the people who were retrenched, terminated, or income reduced, we provided $237 million in support to such persons. We also provided support for persons who had applied for senior citizen grant and disability grants, but had not yet been processed. But simply because they had found themselves in a position to apply, we supported them. It was $14 million of that. And of course, we supplied food vouchers, almost $7 million of that. Rental assistance, $22 million. In short, in terms of additional support to the ongoing social support system for those thousands of persons I mentioned, we provided $360 million in support across to a variety of categories of people. That is what I was saying. Over and above the standard support for people who couldn't make it on their own, the additional people who came on, who couldn't make it, they got $360 million of government support. Today, as I talk with the Minister of Finance, we will revisit this template and ensure that all those who are on the social support system, who are on the system, that they get support. And for those who would look for the essentials of food, we will return to providing some support. $5 million worth only for the month of May until May. We're looking at getting towards May 31st. $5 million worth for those persons who can use the food boxes, which is agriculture and social services. The way it goes is that We did ask the MPs and others to help in forwarding the names to the Social Services Ministry. And the reason for that is that we don't want people getting 6 and 7 and 8 times when others don't get any. So if you're already on the social support system, when your name comes in there, the database ought to identify you as somebody who is not getting help, and then you qualify. And of course, the Agriculture Ministry will work with the farmers and the food distributors at the fresh food end to make sure that is so. And of course, for the month until end of May, we will provide almost $10 million to the ecclesiastical bodies to help those persons who would look to them for support. And we will also determine how much more assistance we could give to those persons who have lost their income by virtue of the closure. One of the things we've been finding out, and I must say this to the country, what we did last year, we asked NIB to help us identify those persons who were on the NIB list. And if they had lost their employment, it was a pretty straightforward matter to get the help to them. What we found out is that a very large number of people were employed by employers who have a problem that is different to COVID. And that problem is that their employees were not being registered for any aspect of state recognition. Not NIS, not taxes, not nothing. So when those workers lost their employment, and you try to help them, saying that we come to you through NIB, we discover then that these people were outside of the system in that way, causing problems for the department to try to help. Because if you don't have some parameter to determine who qualifies for the help, you know what's going to happen. And what was worse is that when the Department of Social Services asked some of those employers to confirm that these people are not double and triple dipping, or that they had in fact lost their job at your establishment by virtue of a one-line letter, some of them refuse on the grounds that to do so is to allow the authorities to know what they have been doing. And of course, that happens to some of the landlords as well. People who needed help were finding out that what they call the underground economy prefer to continue doing what they do, even if it means creating starvation conditions for the unfortunate. These are some of the issues that would have caused delays, and there are some of the issues that we will have to address going forward. But it's not something that we can address tonight for tomorrow. We will immediately make available somewhere between $40 and $50 million. The Minister of Finance is working on that since last weekend to see what we can do to bring some form of assistance to those who are in greatest need. We are not in a position to replace what has been lost in total, because some people are behaving as though what has been lost has to be compensated for by somebody. Ladies and gentlemen, in this pandemic, there are going to be losses of quality of life, hopefully for a little while. You have been seeing the losses being reported by the private sector in their various businesses. Take that a bit further. Those losses are going to be reflected in government's revenue, because if the companies are being forced to restrict their production, or the purchasing power of the population has been reduced in any way, the end result of that is that profit overall, except in very few instances, would have been contracted. I saw one of our better companies reporting a 30-odd% reduction in profits, another one reporting 15%. And those are reductions to the shareholders. But the biggest loss in that is the loss of revenue to the government in the form of taxes, which otherwise would have come to the government. So I want you all to consider all of these things when you get on the soapbox. because these are the realities. And to say that the government has thrown the population out, and all the advisors who give us advice for things that we hadn't thought about at all, and had they not raised it, we wouldn't have thought about it. Let me just understand, and let you understand, it is not so at all. This government has gone way beyond what most governments have done in the world. But of course in Trinidad and Tobago, you take it for granted, and the conversation, just the very conversation is upsetting by its repetition, because it is meant, or it has the effect of giving you the impression that all fall down. All has not fallen down. And we are in a position to keep some things up by doing certain things at the personal, at the familial level. And that's where we are at the moment. And if we do the things that we're being asked to do, we expect, by virtue of the understanding of the experts of the nature of the virus, that maybe by the end of the month or thereabouts, we should be reporting different numbers. On the other hand, if we don't do these things, then the consequences will be dire. Ladies and gentlemen, we have shown that we could do this. We did it last year. And it worked well for us. When we said that Carnival would be cancelled, I said that last year in September. And there were lots of experts telling us what would be the result of that. Yes, the result was we had no Carnival. We had no street marches and so on and so on. But what we had in February was a serious positive response to the virus in February. That was the benefit of cancelling Carnival. We need that kind of benefit now. And I listen to everybody. I respect every point of view. But with respect to the decision making today, the point of view that trumps all others is the point of view of Dr. Marian Richards, who has shown me and has shown you that if we don't move hard now, within 2 weeks, we are going to be where others have been. What you call news from outside. That wouldn't be outside news. That would be the experience that is being enjoyed by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why I am making these decisions based on the advice and the data provided by those who show me and show you that if we don't take this medicine now, our portion would be unthinkable. We could avoid it. But it's not going to be avoided by doing nothing or by doing some of the things that get published as options. One of the options that I saw was one that says that the government shouldn't make any decision before consulting with them. You're falling off a roof, and you consult with who's in the house to bring a mattress so you can drop in the you can fall in the mattress. Let's consult. We do consult. None of these decisions that we make, not one, is being made capriciously or on the basis of a quirk of the Prime Minister's character. Every decision we make and transmit to you is rooted in the work of the staff that is on the government's payroll, in the Ministry of Health. Thank God they're there. Because just ask yourself, if the health department was not there to respond in the way that they have responded to guide the government in this way, what would have been our position? And I will continue to be guided by the medical experts, the wide range of which, thankfully, we have here in Trinidad and Tobago. But I also want to retain that confidence in my fellow citizens, to trust in your responsible conduct, knowing that this is a pandemic. And it requires that you do things that you wouldn't normally have done, including if you were eating 2 bananas, you might try to eat 1 for some good reason, either to make it last longer or to share it with somebody else. Ladies and gentlemen, we all have different responsibilities. And my responsibility as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago is to make the call. And the call has been made. I expect that you will answer. If you have any questions, we will take them now.
Mr. Dale Singh, Renuka Singh from Trinidad Guardian. The principals and teachers, the educators who have to interface with SEA students, they are wondering if there's going to be any special consideration for them in this vaccination drive that's coming up.
Thank you. So I reached out to the Minister of Education some time ago to get a list of her forms 4, 5, and 6 teachers, because those are the ones that are physically out, and their principals and their vice principals. So she's working on that list, and once I get that list, then due consideration will be given to that. Thank you.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Kimberly D'Souza from TTT News. We have some Kimberly D'Souza, TTT News. We have some athletes that are training to go across. Is training going to be halted for them, or can they continue in this time?
Where we have not said specifically that those things that we have allowed exemptions to, they will continue. For example, we had given an exemption to the national teams to prepare. They will continue. We had given an exemption to those persons who protect turtles on the beach. That will continue. But we have stopped tours. So you're not to take tours out to the beach to see turtles, but those who are actually protecting the turtles can go out on the beaches, even though the beaches are closed. So we did leave those things in place. So if you didn't hear that we have withdrawn the exemption, then it remains in place.
Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. It's good to see you in person and in good health. Urvashi from TV6.
Thank you very much, Umesh.
With respect to the restrictions, is it that police will be now on the streets ensuring that only essential persons?
Well, not ensuring that essential persons are there. What we tried before was to have the police ensure that we stay in groups of less than 5. Logistically, that was not workable. So what the police will be ensuring now is that there's no attempt to gather people on the street and to provide them with that service.
And just to be clear, public transportation will continue with the restricted number?
Yes, because that was listed in a particular way. It was worked out, as you know, with 1 window per person, something like that, and so that will continue.
If you wish to permit me, I'd like to ask Dr. Richards.
Sure.
Dr. Richards. So, Dr. Richards, you told us, it's kind of alarming, 10 days and we could reach this crisis level. Could this not have been foreseen last week, sometime before? 10 days is a really short period.
We have been observing this situation daily since the onset of the pandemic. So we do chart our figures and we do look at the hospital occupancy levels and the levels of treatment that are afforded for persons. What we would have noticed was, remember, there was an increase in cases starting from week 11, week 12, and moving forward. And we started putting things in place to really activate further beds, increased capacity at the hospitals, which we did. As I would have indicated, we did increase our capacity level of about 100 additional beds and made some changes within the system to ensure that persons would be taken care of. I won't say that we were not prepared by any means. I'm just saying that the significant increase that we are seeing as a result of the continued movement of persons doing essential and non-essential activities is continuing to increase the rate of this virus to a very high rate, and is resulting in persons going into the hospitals. But we did make forecasting and planning for this in advance.
If I may, Dr. Parasram, we've also been hearing, I've been noting, Dr. Hines would have said that we would the cases started climbing at the beginning of April. And I know we've said activity 2 weeks before would be seen at that point in time. So I'm assuming that something would have happened 2 weeks into March that would have sped up this climb in cases. Also, what you all have been saying is that in addition to having more cases, it appears that the disease is more severe, more people are ending up in hospital, and more people are dying, younger persons, women as well in this category. How much has this new strain P1, you think, been a factor in this climb?
So if you recall, I had said in the early part of March that we noticed a considerable increase. People at the time thought that it was too small. I thought that it was enough to cause a significant increase in terms of a snowball type effect if it started in early March, just because we were going into a season, as you know, there was Easter coming up. There was a period where we expected an increased number of people coming together. When you take this kind of increase, it goes one on top of the next. So you double, then you go into quadruple very fast. So you have a small, if you think about a snowball, the effect is exactly like a snowball. So you start small, and very quickly you go 2 to 4 to 6 to 8, and then 16, and that is what we're seeing in the graphs that Dr. Hines would have presented. The proportion of persons, today we actually were in the process of going to report 10 additional P1 strains from all parts of the country, predominantly St. George Central, St. George West. When we take the number of samples that Professor Carrington would have done so far, we're looking at about 300 samples tested so far for any form of variants. With regards to P1, the 10 will take our number to about 25. And those 25 would have been picked up majority-wise from the community in most parts. P1 is said to be about 1.5 to 2.5 more transmissible than the previous strain, which is the main strain of the Wuhan strain. Taking that into consideration, certainly, and because of the localities we have found the P1 in this country over the last month or so, that the P1 certainly has a role to play. It tends to be more transmissible. What we're seeing is increasing viral loads of persons, meaning they have a higher viral load, and a lot of times they have less symptoms in the early stages. And what it means is that if you have higher viral loads with less symptoms, you can move through our population much faster. It is a recipe for quicker spread, and that's what we're seeing with P1. There haven't been the literature, in the literature at least, that P1 is more severe. Having noted, as Dr. Hines would have indicated, we did see a couple deaths in younger people, one in the 30s, a couple in the 40s, without comorbidities in the last few days, which is a worrying trend, and it's a concern whether it can be attributed or not to P1. Only time will tell as we confirm those samples. So again, the role of P1 it seems to be well established. It seems to be conforming to what we know, which means it's moving faster, hitting harder, as there are headlines from other countries. So we have to double up on our restrictions and be very vigilant to stop the spread.
You spoke about symptoms. We've noticed that some people have been complaining recently that they have, as you mentioned, little symptoms, just body pains, and then they just end up in hospital. Are there any additional symptoms people can look out for?
So, the symptomatology has been the same. Described very similarly again. With any variant, that is, a virus will survive. The fitter viruses will survive. So when they evolve and they have variants of concern, you find the ones that have asymptomatic spread will spread faster and survive better, because you can't pick them up and you can't stop it. And that's what we're seeing. But the symptomatology is more or less the same.
Is there anything additional that people could do, double mask or just lose their personal?
I think we have been at it for about a year and a half, close to, in the world. The 6 simple things that we have been saying over and over again is what people need to do. It is a virus. It requires a susceptible person. It requires an infected person. And it requires the virus to move from one person to the next. If we separate those two people by masking, by distance, by hand washing, we can prevent the spread. Whether it's P1, B117, South African, we can do it by doing the same things we have been doing for the last year. And that's what we need to do well again.
Yes, Sean.
Yeah, I have a question here. There is scarce info on, you could actually give me a little more technical thing. There is, rather than policy, there is scarce info on contact tracing. Does contact tracing suggest that the upsurge in cases is from restaurants and therefore support their closure? What other activities have been most responsible for the recent case increase?
Right. So what we saw really is a lot of workplace transmission being documented. We have said clearly that historically it's difficult to tell where you have been. A lot of people just say you went to work and you came back home. They forget all the little bits. They forget that they stopped at a space to have food. They stopped at the gym. They forget all the little bits in between. As far as they know, they went to work and they came back home. So historically, there's an issue. What we are seeing is, in the West especially, as well as some parts of St. George Central, the contact tracers at the CMO which are telling me there's a lot of hidden contacts. It's a lot of, contacts from private gatherings that are coming back to them, which is difficult for us to get at any public spaces. So that is what the contact tracers are telling us generally. Workplace spread is happening. And again, the issue with the restaurants, of course, is you can't wear a mask. So once you drop your mask, you drop your guard. And from the public health science that we know, that is a critical success factor that we have had in the country.
Mr. Prime Minister, if we go back to the essential services only, that would mean some private workplaces will have to reduce staff or cut it off?
No. The essential services are the services that within the public sector and the public utilities. The private sector we have not put, except for those that attract people to the business in a particular way. We have not really put the restrictions on the private sector. I did mention that manufacturing is still going to go on, transportation will still go on, energy sector is still going on, and farming, agricultural farming is still going on. So what the government has done to reduce the number of people out there is to pull in from the government's payroll. And the other groupings are people who will gather for other purposes.
Do you think private sector in that case should take the initiative to work from home, stagger their hours and so on?
Well, if anything like that would help, and I'm sure some of the private sector is doing that. I mean, we have all discovered, and some people are reporting that there's some improved productivity working from home. But some things you just have to go to the workplace for. I mean, you can't do repairs on the system if you are home, but you can probably contribute to that by what your specific is. So we leave that up to the private sector and we say, if there are things that you could do, please chip in, you know, who work from home, rotating hours. I mean, we would have loved to leave the supermarkets open for 24 hours so that there is more time and people will spread out more. But experience has shown us that it doesn't work like that. Everybody wants to go at a particular time. And the longer people are exposed in groups, it is the greater the chances of the virus spreading. So that's why we bring in the restriction to restrict you. And we leave it up to you now to determine when do I go to avoid the crowd. And we did that before. We had an hour before for the elderly, was it 8 to 9 or something like that. So we need to do these cooperative things because these are the kinds of things that are working. Eh? What we don't need are the things that you, as I said, elective entertainment type things or sightseeing life. We could do without that for the moment. And that will give us an opportunity to turn the virus away and then come back to some semblance of normalcy.
Are you convinced that this current lockdown, these measures are sufficient?
Well, that's a question that I really don't have the answer to, a yes or no. But what I do know is that it gives us the best chance. That these measures give us the best chance without, breaking the mold. Because if this doesn't work, may I ask you, what is the next step? If after all of this, it doesn't work, what is the next action we take? Because one option that is not available is the option to do nothing. Eh? So I hope you grasp what this government has been doing. We have been reluctantly interfering with the systems that are economic and social, but we have been taking only so much to be able to be in control of the situation. But if it appears as though the situation is going to get in control of us, then there are other things that we may have to do. Because we are never going to sit down here and say, well, okay, some people are advising that. There's one particular former Minister of Health who publishes every day in Trinidad and Tobago, just leave the virus to have its fun, and if you survive, you survive, because the virus is going to be with us all the time. Well, there's some logic to that, that as human beings, we have been exposed to viruses all our lives, and those viruses, we've come to live with them. Sometimes they give us the flu, and one or two people die from the flu and so on. But this is not the same situation. If you take that laissez-faire approach with the virus at this stage, when the human population is not building up antibodies to be able to fight with some chance of winning, if you take that position, there's a country in South America where the government is being accused of genocide because people have not been given the opportunity to fight off death as an outcome. As we vaccinate, and by we I mean populations, including Trinidad and Tobago, the human population will become more sustainable as a living organism in the presence of this virus that has joined. Remember I said earlier on, the problem that we're having as human beings is that this virus has just come and joined us. People are still looking for the source, but the bottom line is the human population was not able to respond to it as it responds to other kinds of viruses and bacteria. So it's a peculiar situation where if you don't do anything and let it naturally build up herd immunity. There was one prime minister who had taken that position up front. One prime minister of a major country decided, let us not expend this kind of money. Let's not disrupt the economy. Just let the virus go through. A few are going to die. But the bottom line is better. So the bottom line is he ended up in the hospital within a hair's breadth of being a statistic. And subsequently, you would have seen the kinds of responses in that country to ensure that the population was given the best option to survive the virus at this stage. Unfortunately for us, they cornered all the vaccines to do that. And while we get advice here to vaccinate the population, there are two things. One, vaccines are still difficult to get, but we are getting some, and we're going to be using them as we get them in the way that will be described to you in detail. And also, people have to decide to be vaccinated. Because if we have vaccines, and there are people saying, I'm not going to take the vaccine, we're back to square one. Because that level of human response to the virus will be lower. And then the virus will continue to be very happy amongst us, taking many of us along the way.
Is there any update on vaccines coming in? Because we've had, like, people have had
yes,
one.
Yes, some of this. Minister, could you give the update, please?
So, thank you. So, what we have in country so far, let's just go back in time. 2,000 from the gift from Barbados, 40,000 from SII in India, a gift, and we got 33,600 as an advance of our 100,000 from COVAX. We have another 33,600 from COVAX coming in May. That is more or less guaranteed from a AstraZeneca plant in Europe. I believe it's a plant in Italy. Then we have another 33,000 to make up the 100,000 coming in. We can't give you a date as yet. So that is where we are with the COVAX facility. What is interesting is that WHO approved Meduna on Friday for EUL, EUA, and they have committed, I believe, CMO, is it 50 million doses? Yeah, emergency use authorization, emergency use license, and Meduna has pledged, I believe, 500 million doses to the COVAX facility. So we are already, I met with Dr. Wheeler this morning of PAHO to indicate our interest in that. The Meduna vaccine is a little more difficult logistically to handle because that one needs to be stored at -20. But we have -20 storage capacity in Trinidad for about 750,000 to 1 million doses at -20. So if we get Meduna, we're in a good place to store it and use it. We still continue talks with Sinopharm. There has been a little delay by WHO in giving emergency use authorization to Sinopharm. It was initially due at the end of last week. My understanding this morning, again, speaking to Dr. Wheeler and looking at the different authorized websites, Sinopharm should get, all things being equal, emergency use authorization this week. If that happens, the Honorable Prime Minister, as you know, did have a conference call with the President of China some time ago. And once that emergency use authorization is completed, we have 100,000 doses of Sinopharm, which I think is already waiting to come into Trinidad and Tobago, should that happen. We continue to work with the African Medicines Council. They have indicated they're in the process of drawing up their sales contracts, but no firm dates and times as yet. So that is where we are with vaccine procurement at this point in time.
We could also mention that one of the bright lights of hope that we had was the Johnson & Johnson authorization that was issued, and there was a temporary review, and that was overcome. And then there was the offer by the United States to put a large volume of AstraZeneca into the COVAX, and Johnson & Johnson was going to put a large output into the African Medical Supplies platform. Those two pathways would have put us in a very good position. But there has been a problem in the United States with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine at the main production facility in Baltimore, where there has been some alleged contamination. And the government of the United States, having made the offer, is now having to look at whether in fact they do have that vaccine to be made available, and they're evaluating the safety of the supply system there. So without improved word from there, we would have lost that. The bottom line is that we still do not have vaccines available in commerce. Now that Meduna has been approved, and the U.S. is at a stage where I think their position is anybody who wants a vaccine can get one as of the 19th or 17th of April. That tells us that we may have vaccines for commerce very soon, and once that is so, it will then become a price and availability issue. But at least there will be a market in which you can purchase. So I did also see among the information that we get daily in the public domain is the encouragement to have the private sector help us with it. Well, we'd love to get help, but it still remains that we know of no situation where the private sector, as of today, has been able to access, because they will have the same problem or worse in accessing vaccines, because vaccines are not available for purchase at this time. Maybe sometime in the not too distant future that may be so, and then there might be a bigger role for the private sector to use their resources and their infrastructure to help. But in the meantime, we've moved very slowly, but surely, to accessing COVAX, which we expect from all the contacts and information we have, that the COVAX will be receiving replenishments going forward. And that is good news for us.
I have a question for Minister Hines. Minister, good afternoon.
Prime Minister.
From our past experience, we would have noticed that when measures are imposed, you see the resurgence of these backdoor activities, parties, gatherings, and so on. Does your ministry anticipate this, and how will you be dealing with this?
There was a lot of discussion in the national community over the last 72 hours or so, touching and concerning that matter. The police are sensitized to what the law is. They too are aware of what the experts have been saying in terms of the main causes of the spread of this virus. You have just identified one of them, and I give you the assurance the police is paying attention to that with an intention to apply the law to its fullest effect.
Following your press conference yesterday, a video started circulating over social media showing what appeared to be a migrant village in a carcass where some alleged illegal migrants were living there in this village-type environment. Have you had sight of this video? Has it garnered the attention of your ministry?
The essence of the press conference yesterday was to address in the generality the border issues for Trinidad and Tobago. We did that, I suspect, quite adequately. We are not altogether moved by particular videos. We are aware that we have a problem based on our resources and our circumstances. And as we indicated yesterday, we are addressing that to the best of our ability and in the shortest possible time, so that, you know, the general issue, having been dealt with, these videos would lose their trauma effect on the society as the previous one had. Thank you.
Of course, Minister, the fear of the public would be, given that we could get over this phase, if we could see to the end of May as a country and not see that spike continue, that the borders remain as closed as possible to ensure that we do not see a resurgence or another wave of the virus.
That was precisely one of the issues we addressed yesterday, and we are focusing on achieving optimum protection and security at all of our borders, precisely with matters like that in mind.
Well, let me just come in here, because I was talking to one of my CARICOM colleagues yesterday. We always in communication on these matters. And yesterday, the Prime Minister of Jamaica gave me the courtesy of informing me that I think sometime today, Jamaica will put Trinidad and Tobago on a restriction list of countries from which persons cannot travel, largely because of our acknowledgement that we have the P1? The P1 virus here. Now, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we are in a peculiar geographical location. This virus is raging in Brazil. Brazil has a border with Guyana. Guyana is part of CARICOM. Yeah. And people are coming from Guyana by way of CARICOM arrangements into Trinidad and Tobago. We should not take a lot of comfort in the fact that if we focus in that way on the migrants, that we'll be given a pass for the rest of our population. All over the world, there's this virus raging among populations of human beings without Venezuelans. Way up north, deep in Michigan, they had one of the worst conditions in America in the last few weeks. So, yes, migrants are a threat to us, and they could keep helping us to persevere with the virus in our population if they keep coming and bringing it to us. So we do everything that is logistically possible to cut that stream off. But as you know, as fast as we block here, they push there, and of course, with some local help, it is relatively easy to run 7 miles across the border, 7 miles. But I don't want the national population of non-Venezuelans to get a pass by saying, it's the border, the border, the border, the border. It is not only that. In fact, statistically, that is a small part of the problem. The virus is in our national population. You would have seen, if Dr. Hines was able to show you where we were in early March, you would have seen St. George East, St. George Central, and St. George West not in the Manhattans. But in the last few weeks, in 3 weeks actually, I think St. George East is now the tallest of the spikes, and St. George West, which is the Diego Martin, Carenage, Port of Spain area, right up there behind. So it is the national population that is providing hiding the petri dish virus. So yes, we have a migrant problem because we are literally attached to South America. And for those who are telling you that they would have prevented the virus from coming into the country, fine, that sounds good. But we would have had some difficulty building that dome, right? And it may be that they would have got under the dome and come in too, because people have dug tunnels to get from country to country. We have a bit of water between us and Venezuela, and it is extremely difficult unless you have a North Korean type of system in place to say that you will guarantee that nobody comes into this country from outside. That is just so much old talk. We have done very well in the last few months in managing and controlling migration across our border. And our border, we say loosely the border is closed, but basically what we are operating management over the border. That's what it is. The border is not just shut like a door and who outside, outside, who inside, inside. We have brought tens of thousands of persons across the border, and we're still doing that. But what do we say to Guyanese? As a matter of fact, I had raised with the Minister of Health when we first saw what was happening in Guyana, that maybe we should consider putting special restrictions on Guyana. But then the logistical and other difficulties arose. And of course, here we are Trinidad and Tobago, and we have taken certain additional steps to protect Tobago. That does not find favor with everybody, but as I say, it's not an everybody thing. The government will make the decisions in these situations and hope that the outcome benefits. Because in some countries, which are much larger, they had drawn lines between east and west, north and south, to prevent you from, Australia is a continent. If you were in Sydney, there were a time you could not go west of Sydney. And right now, those of you who were listening to what was being said about me, making our people stateless because we said to them, shelter in place and don't come home just yet, we'll bring you home over time. The Australian government has just told all Australians in India, do not come home. And if you come home, you pay $10,000 or you go to jail. Understand? It's not because the Australian government want to make Australians stateless. It's because they're trying to deal with the demands of a pandemic. And maybe might very well be that I am overly nervous about this because I learned this as a child. I told you all the experience I had with